Hello family, welcome to Stories with Modi. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. As you do so, sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The air in the office felt cold, sterile, like the hollow shell Jenny had become over the years. As she sat across from David, she couldn't help but notice how little he seemed to care. His eyes barely lifted from his phone, fingers tapping away, sending texts. Jenny no longer needed to guess the recipient of Rose. The name had lingered in the shadows of their marriage for years, but today it no longer mattered. Jenny's trembling hands steadied as she picked up the pen, signing the divorce papers with calm precision. The finality of the ink on the page didn't evoke the pain she had anticipated. Instead, it left a void, one that she wasn't quite ready to confront. David didn't even feign sadness. In fact, there was relief written all over him, though he tried to mask it under a guise of professionalism. "We can finalize everything by next week," he said, barely glancing up. His voice was clipped, indifferent, as if she were nothing more than a business deal that had run its course. Jenny studied his face, searching for remnants of the man she had once loved, but all she saw was detachment, a stranger in the place of the husband she had devoted her life to. There was no bitterness left in her heart, just exhaustion from years of trying to salvage something that was never truly hers to keep. As Jenny stood to leave, the silence between them was deafening. David offered no parting words, no regret. The door clicked softly behind her, and Jenny felt as though she had stepped out of a prison she hadn't realized she was confined to. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, but for the first time in years, Jenny felt unchained. Alone, but unchained. The hum of the plane's engines was a welcome distraction as Jenny gazed out the small oval window, watching the clouds drift lazily below. She pressed her forehead to the glass, her reflection barely visible in the faint glow of the cabin lights. Somewhere below lay the city she was leaving behind, its skyline a blur of memories, regrets, and unfulfilled dreams. The ticket to visit her Aunt Hannah had been booked in haste, a last-minute escape from a life that had offered her nothing but heartbreak. Jenny's bags were light, as was her heart. There was nothing she wanted to take with her from the life she once shared with David. Her thoughts drifted to the early years, the hopeful newlywed days, when she believed love was enough to weather any storm. How naive she had been, mistaking David's ambition for love and his empty promises for loyalty. She had clung to him even as he drifted further into the arms of another woman. Jenny let out a quiet sigh, blinking away the sting behind her eyes. Her loyalty to David had cost her more than she cared to admit. Distance from her father, strained friendships, and a part of herself she doubted she would ever reclaim. As the seatbelt light flickered off, Jenny leaned back, letting exhaustion claim her. Aunt Hannah's warm voice echoed in her mind, promising comfort and healing. Jenny wasn't sure if she believed in healing anymore, but she was willing to try. Somewhere in the quiet of Hannah's home, away from David and the life she once knew, Jenny hoped to rediscover the woman she had been before love turned her heart to stone. The call came unexpectedly, piercing through the calm morning like a sharp blade. Jenny sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling beside her as Aunt Hannah bustled around the room. Jenny had begun to feel a quiet peace settling in, the ache in her chest dulling with each passing day. But when Hannah's phone rang and Jenny caught the somber expression on her aunt's face, she knew before a word was spoken that something had shifted. Hannah gently pressed the phone to her chest before turning to Jenny, her eyes soft with sympathy. "It's your father, Simeon." "He's gone," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Jenny's heart skipped, though she wasn't sure if it was grief or guilt that gripped her first. She hadn't seen Simeon in over 2 years. Their last conversation had been cold, strained by years of misunderstandings. In Jenny's unwavering defense of David, her father had warned her time and time again, but Jenny's stubbornness had driven a wedge between them. Now, there were no more chances for reconciliation, no final goodbyes. Jenny stared blankly at the wall, the weight of her choices pressing heavily on her shoulders. "I'll go back," Jenny finally said, her voice steady but hollow. Aunt Hannah reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know it won't be easy, but maybe this is your chance to make peace," Hannah offered. Jenny nodded, though she doubted peace was what awaited her at home. Still, Simeon's funeral wasn't just about saying farewell to her father. It was about returning to the life she thought she had left behind, a life that, no matter how hard she tried, was not yet finished with her. The day of the funeral arrived, cloaked in a heavy, unforgiving rain. The sky mirrored the weight pressing down on Jenny's chest as she stepped out of the black car, clutching an umbrella that did little to shield her from the whispers carried by the wind. The cemetery, shrouded in gray mist, was filled with familiar faces, relatives she hadn't spoken to in years and acquaintances who had once admired her father's power. Jenny walked slowly toward the front, her heels sinking slightly into the damp earth. Each step was a reminder of the distance she had placed between herself and this world. Her father's casket lay beneath a tent, an ornate display of wealth and respect. Jenny knew he would have expected it. She stood at the edge of the crowd, separate yet painfully visible, her black veil casting shadows across her unreadable expression. Eyes followed her every movement, but none were as piercing as David's. He stood near the front, his hand wrapped possessively around Rose's arm. Jenny's gaze briefly met his, and a flicker of something, perhaps regret or curiosity, flashed across his face before it disappeared behind indifference. Rose, however, wore her satisfaction like a crown. She leaned into David, whispering something that earned a smirk from him. Jenny looked away, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her discomfort. Her presence was enough to remind them that she had returned, and in this moment of mourning, Jenny could feel the undercurrents of something far greater than grief. This wasn't just about her father, it was about reclaiming what she had lost, starting with the dignity she had once given away too freely. As the priest began his solemn sermon, Jenny's focus drifted. Her mind wandered back to the last conversation she had with her father, brief and filled with the kind of tension that left no room for reconciliation. Simeon had warned her about David, and she had walked away, choosing David's lies over her father's wisdom. Now, standing at his grave, Jenny felt the echo of those choices reverberate through her bones. She had been wrong to leave, but now she was back, and though her father was gone, his legacy was not. As the final prayer ended and the mourners dispersed, Jenny remained by the grave, her silent promise hanging heavily in the air. She would not let Simeon's empire crumble at the hands of David or anyone else. The reading of the will took place in Simeon's estate, a grand but eerily quiet mansion. Jenny had once called home. The vast corridors lined with portraits of their family felt colder in his absence. Jenny sat at the long mahogany table, her fingers tracing the rim of an untouched glass of water. Across from her, David and Rose sat side by side, their confidence palpable. Rose's ruby lips curved into a faint smile, one Jenny recognized as arrogance. To Rose, this was a mere formality, a stepping stone to wealth she believed was already hers. David's eyes flickered toward Jenny occasionally, but his expression remained unreadable. The lawyer, Mr. Andrews, cleared his throat and unfolded the document with the gravity of someone fully aware of the weight his next words would carry. In the matter of the estate of Simeon Matt Matthews, he began, his voice echoing in the room. Jenny straightened, her heart thudding quietly beneath her composed exterior. Mr. Andrews continued, detailing small bequests to extended family members, donations to charities, and a few sentimental gifts left to old friends. But when he reached the heart of the will, the inheritance of Simeon's business empire, Jenny felt the room still. The entirety of Simeon Matthews' estate, including Matthews Corporation, will pass to his daughter, Jenny Matthews, Andrews announced. For the first time since the funeral, David's mask of indifference cracked. Rose stiffened beside him, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "This must be a mistake," David said, his voice calm but edged with suppressed panic. Rose leaned forward, her polished nails tapping impatiently on the table. "Surely not," she added, her smile faltering. Mr. Andrews met their gaze with the unshakable composure of a man who had prepared for this reaction. "The will was updated 3 months ago," he replied, sliding a notarized document across the table. Jenny remained silent, her face betraying nothing, but inside, a quiet sense of vindication flickered to life. This was her father's final act, a gesture that spoke louder than any apology ever could. Jenny stood at the entrance to her father's office, the leather chair behind the large oak desk empty but commanding. The room smelled of aged books and polished wood, a familiar scent that pulled her back to childhood memories of watching her father conduct business. His presence lingered here in the carefully arranged papers and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Jenny took a slow breath before stepping inside, trailing her fingers along the desk's edge. This was hers now, the company, the responsibility, and the power. But as she lowered herself into the chair, she could feel the weight of doubt creeping in. The board members had gathered earlier that day, offering polite smiles and thinly veiled skepticism. Though they respected Simeon, Jenny was untested, a young woman thrust into a world dominated by seasoned businessmen. She had felt their doubt like daggers, but Jenny knew better than to let it show. This was not the first time she had been underestimated, and she had no intention of failing. Over the next few hours, Jenny pored over files and contracts, immersing herself in the inner workings of Matthews Corporation. Her father's meticulous notes lined the margins, small insights that began to piece together the larger vision he had for the company. As dusk settled outside the tall windows, Jenny closed the last folder and leaned back in the chair. Her reflection in the glass revealed a woman transformed, not the fragile wife David had discarded, but someone new, someone willing to fight. The empire Simeon built would not be taken by those who lurked in the shadows, waiting for her to fail. Jenny's fingers tightened around the armrests, her resolve solidifying. Let them doubt her. Let David watch from the sidelines. Jenny Matthews was ready to take control, and no one, not David, not Rose, would stand in her way. David's sudden appearance at Jenny's office was as unwelcome as it was predictable. She had anticipated his arrival the moment the will was read, yet seeing him standing there, leaning casually against the door frame as if he still had a claim to this world, stirred something cold and sharp within her. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, David exuded the confidence of a man who believed charm could erase betrayal. "Jenny," he greeted smoothly, stepping inside without invitation. His voice carried the same condescension she remembered from their marriage, the tone he used when masking ulterior motives with polite words. Jenny's gaze barely lifted from the stack of documents before her. "What do you want, David?" she asked, her voice even, though the air between them bristled with unspoken tension. David circled the office slowly, letting his fingers graze the polished desk as if attempting to remind her of the life they once shared. "I came to congratulate you," he began, though the smirk tugging at his lips betrayed his sincerity. "Your father's empire, it's impressive. I didn't think you had it in you." Jenny's eyes narrowed. She could sense the veiled hunger behind his words, the way his gaze flickered to the gold nameplate on her desk. He wasn't here to congratulate her, he was here to find cracks in her armor, to inch his way back into power. David leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "I know how overwhelming this must be. Matthews Corporation is no small task. I could help, be by your side." His hand brushed hers, and Jenny pulled away instantly, the movement cutting the air like a blade. "I don't need your help," she replied, her voice hardened by years of his deception. "You had your chance, David. You chose Rose. Now live with it." David's smile faltered, his grip tightening subtly on the chair opposite her. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Jenny felt a quiet satisfaction ripple through her. This was no longer the woman he had cast aside. The scales had shifted, and David was now the one left reaching. Without another word, Jenny stood, walking to the window and staring down at the city her father built. "Your mistake," she said softly, "was assuming I needed you to stand." The weight of her words hung between them like a verdict. David lingered for a moment longer before turning on his heel, the echo of his footsteps fading down the corridor. The charity gala was a display of opulence, glittering chandeliers, silk tablecloths, and the hum of conversation beneath the soft glow of golden lights. Jenny arrived fashionably late, stepping into the ballroom with the kind of confidence that only came from knowing you belonged. Heads turned as she entered, dressed in a sleek black gown that draped elegantly over her figure. Whispers trailed her like shadows, but Jenny paid them no mind. She wasn't here for attention. She was here to make a statement. Across the room, she spotted David and Rose, their figures intertwined in an attempt to maintain appearances. Rose, in particular, looked radiant, but Jenny could see through the fragile mask she wore. Jenny approached the main floor with deliberate grace, her glass of champagne barely touched as she mingled with familiar faces. When she finally stood within earshot of Rose, Jenny's timing was impeccable. Jenny Matthews, Rose greeted with faux enthusiasm, the smile on her lips failing to reach her eyes. How unexpected, Jenny returned the smile, but there was steel behind it. Rose, she replied smoothly, raising her glass in mock celebration. I didn't realize this gala